It is time for our January reading wrap-up. I read 12 books this month, and as usual, I did calculate my official page numbers read, which was 3,252-ish, which I'll explain in a second. If you've been here before, you know how it works. Basically, I separate the books I read into books that I recommend and say, yes girl, go buy it, you need this in your life. And then books that I think were fine, they were decent reads, but weren't necessarily worth spending your money on. And then I get into the books that I think absolutely not, hated it, I'm cranky, and still a little mad after reading it. So you can stay for as long or as little as your little heart desires. You can just watch the stuff I recommend, or you can stick around and keep an eye on the books that I thought were either just okay or books you should skip, so that when you're in a bookstore or shopping on Amazon or what have you, you know which books to maybe avoid. So either way, it's up to you. You know, you just do what your heart tells you. We are gonna go ahead and dive on in. Out of the 12 books, there are only 3 that I would really go out of my way to recommend that I really enjoyed, and I do feel kind of sad. That's like a ratio that I feel could be improved. 3 out of 12 that I loved, but I will say those 3 really enjoyed and have like 0 qualms about recommending them to you, so that's gotta count for something. The first of those is The Dreamers, which I did give 5 out of 5 stars, which I almost never do. You know, I like to withhold those. You probably recognize this one from my first 5-star read of the year video, and I basically complimented that book for about 8 minutes straight in that video. So in this one, I'm gonna keep it short and just say that this is a contemporary post-apocalyptic vibes, but it's mostly contemporary. It's mostly a thought-provoking book and mostly about like the characters, and it has a lot of beautiful lines in there, like writing of Celeste Ng that's like efficient, says a lot with a little. It's basically about a town that has a sleeping sickness come through it, a sleeping sickness that does kill. It uses that sickness and that sort of apocalyptic vibe to kind of keep the pages turning as a part of the mystery, but the real core of the book is just about the core theme and the core messages about caring for other people, about loving them, and all the sacrifices that are inherent with loving or feeling things for another human being. So basically, I'm obsessed with it, but just go in, open mind. I think you're gonna really like it. Next is something very grim, very macabre. Am I the only one who wants to say macabre because I have like the worst pronunciations of anything ever? No, just me? All right, well, anyway. So The Butchering Art is about the grisly era of Victorian medicine and about a surgeon named Lister. Why can't I remember his first name? It's J. Joseph Lister? This is embarrassing. All right, I looked it up. I was right, it is Joseph Lister, so 10 points to my brain for being able to remember that. 10 points to me. I read that like almost 30 days ago now, so good job, mind machine. Anyways, this book, I absolutely adored it. It is by a woman named Lindsay Fitzpatrick. I will henceforth read anything she writes. This book was so friggin' good, and I know it's a grisly topic, but you know me, you know? I like to be disturbed. The book itself is like half of a period piece and half of a biography. I really feel that these surgeons like Joseph Lister, who worked very hard to improve the medicine of the time and really push us forward as a society, these are the heroes of our time that are forgotten by our history books, but men and women who had these like incredible impacts on the world today, but we just don't acknowledge them. I think that's kind of a bummer, and I just love that this book celebrates what he did, and it does it in the most enthralling, addicting way. I was actually sad when the book ended because I just wanted it to keep going. I just wanted to know more weird facts about Victorian medicine and Joseph Lister. I mean, I'd like a book too, please. So if you are at all interested in that subject, like at all, then I say go for it. I absolutely adored it. I only listened to it on audiobook, and now I'm on the hunt for a physical copy. I hate it when that happens, you know? It's like it always occurs to the books that you listen on audiobook or ebook, and then you feel like, I need a physical copy for my shelves. I'm feeling that right now. And I know you're gonna understand, because you too are a fellow book nerd who needs to have multiple copies of books they love because we're weird. The third and final book that I would really recommend to you is by my old pal, Louis L'Amour. And you probably recognize this name if you are, I don't know, under 35 or something. You probably recognize it as something that your dad or your granddad read as an author that they would know. These books are just part of the American canon in a way that I feel like is not thoroughly appreciated. And what kind of makes me sad, frankly, is that he has been like largely forgotten by the modern generation. And I don't know if that's because the content matter, which was really about like adventure stories and about like out west, and he had like his own little genre basically. And you could buy his books. I have a copy, or had a copy of one of his books when it was originally published, and it said 40 cents on the cover. So that should just tell you about the times that those books came out. I don't know if we've lost interest as a society in like the cowboy ideal, but for whatever reason, people never know it. They just know it as something that their dad or grandpa read, and that's kind of a bummer because I think he has really something to offer. I wish that you would just give him a chance. And I'm really happy because Random House actually brought back a copy of one of his unpublished works that his son, Beau, finished for him. It always makes me nervous when you read a book like posthumously published that is finished by someone else, because you just never know what you're gonna get. But I will say, thoroughly enjoying this, and I hope to read it again. I really do. I've got about 30 pages left, so like, you know, full transparency, I'm recording this on the 31st and it'll be up on Saturday. You know how sometimes you just know? This is a book I hope to read again. There's quotes I wish I had underlined and now have to like search back through and find, but basically I love it. It gives me John Steinbeck vibes, it's given me Dennis Johnson vibes. Basically, it's very American. The book itself, maybe I should tell you what it's about, is about not the West this time. This is actually about time on a ship, which I've never read anything like this. I don't, you know, honestly, I hate the ocean. Yeah. I actually think it's really fascinating and cool, but I do have an irrational, you know what? It's not irrational, it is rational. I have a rational fear of the deep open ocean. Not into it, dude. Not doing it. You can't force me into this. I will never go on a cruise, probably ever. No, I'm starting to panic, honestly, just thinking about it. But that's why I read about it in books, so that I can live through it that way. And there's a certain romance about this book. It's about the men who comprise the tanker and these guys who live on it, guys that you would see on the street and think that they were probably the worst scum of the earth, but their histories and who they are really surprise you. And I think it's beautifully done. It's written like a classic. If you're not into classics, you're not gonna like this. There's a lot to think about. It's a lot to process. It's not really like a casual fun read. I mean, it is fun, but I'm just saying it's not like a YA, you know? It requires to be chewed a little bit. Plot-wise, pretty loose structurally, but it's really about character studies, kind of. And it all makes sense how they're tied together, and it is kind of hard to remember who exactly is who, but it doesn't really matter. It's about the characters themselves. It's about the messages, about life, about everyday heroism, about common men doing extraordinary things. I think that this is really a piece of American history and American culture that I sadly believe is dying out. So I would just like you to hold on to this if you're at all interested in this sort of scenario. Give it a read, or just check out one of his older books. This one in particular does a great job of emphasizing like both the loneliness of the sea and the enchantment of it. So Beau, if you happen to watch this one day, man, you crushed it. It feels like your dad's writing, and I think you did a hell of a job putting this together. So 10 points to you and to your respective Hogwarts house. Those are the 3 books that I really loved. I loved them in January. I thought, my golly, these are the ones. Memorable. They're gonna be stuck in there a little bit. Those are all like 4.5, 5-star reads. So if that's all you wanted, if you just wanted the best, girl, bye. But if you want to see the rest of them, then stick around. Let's do this. The next little section, segment, whatever, that we're gonna do is the books that I thought were fine. They were okay, but I wasn't necessarily in love with them, and they did have some issues that annoyed me. The first of those, or actually, no, the first 2 of those I feel like are a weird middle ground, and I will explain. The first one is Alien Out of the Shadows. Now, all right, disclaimer, if you have not watched the Alien films, which I honestly am madly in love with and are a huge part of my upbringing. Ripley is my female 80s hero. I just if you have never watched those, then this is like completely irrelevant to you. You're gonna be like, what? and that's fine. But if you do watch the Alien films, if you have them as part of your makeup, that they meant something to you and that you're like a fan of that series, then you should probably check this out. It's an Audible original performance. It's a full cast. I'm not sure, frankly, where this falls, because technically it is an abridged version of a book, and it was on Goodreads, and it was on Audible. So I feel kind of weird about counting it, not counting it, but I'm counting it because technically it's based on a book. It's kind of like an abridged, scripted version of the book, so I'm counting it, and you know, you can take it or leave it. But if you are a fan of the Alien world and you just want more without having to binge watch all the movies, then yeah, check it out. It's a good time. And I'm gonna do this really quick because I know not all of you even know what I'm talking about, but this is sort of a between timelines that some reviewers said shouldn't have even existed, and that if it did, Ripley shouldn't have been a part of it. And I have to say to you people, if you're probably never gonna watch this, but if you do, why would you say that Ripley shouldn't be in things? If you ask me, Ripley should be in everything. You could drop her in the middle of Pride and Prejudice and I would be happy about it, you know? So Ripley forever, just get out of here if you didn't want Ripley in that book. All right, that's it for that one, sort of an in-between. And the next one that's in the middle of the road for me is American Woolf. The reason I feel a little in between about this one is because this is one of those rare cases where I can recognize that me not loving it is not the book's fault, it's mine. The reviews for this book, astounding. People love it. It's got like 4.5 something or other, maybe more, on Amazon and Goodreads. People love it, all right? It's basically about the reintroduction of wolves in America. And if you gave this book to me and you were like, Bex, it's everything you love, you know? It's nerdy, it's outdoors, it's wilderness, it's biology, I would be like, yes, sign me up. And that's probably how I ended up listening to it. But unfortunately for me, I just didn't get it. I just didn't get the connection to it. And people in the reviews would be like, I was so emotional reading this, such a great portrayal of the wolves. And I don't know if it's like that I'm too close to this or that I already know it, or I don't know, but I just wasn't feeling it, dude. So this is one of those situations where I don't personally recommend it because I did not connect to it. So I rated it like a 3-star for me, but that's not a judgment for once on the actual structure of the book. I just wasn't that interested. So if you are interested in wolves and reintroduction and the ecology of that, and you don't mind a lot of the political side of wildlife biology and maintenance and all that jazz, then you're probably gonna really like it. I'm just the one lone weirdo who for some reason am broken inside and did not connect to it. So that's just me. But other than that, let's move on from those weird little in-between books is the rest of this section, which are definitely middle of the road books that I had a few problems with. First of those is The In-Between Days by Eva Woods. Now in 2017, I picked Eva Woods' previous book, Something Like Happy, as one of my best contemporary books of 2017. I really liked it. She has this unique voice that kind of, she'll talk about really serious subjects, like in Something Like Happy, it follows like a cancer patient, so it's a really serious, sad thing, but she has this hilarious voice where you're like laughing the whole time and then you end up crying at some point. It's like a really weird like gift that she has to make you feel two of those things at the same time. In The In-Between Days, which was just released, it's a new release this month, it's about a sister dynamic, and one of the sisters is put into a coma, and we're basically like in her consciousness going through a lot of her past memories, and she's like visited by these apparitions that say she has to relive some of her life in order to be able to hopefully wake up in 3 days. And then we have the sister who's awake, who is trying to piece together what led up to this, if her sister did it intentionally, because essentially what happened is her sister got hit by a bus. So the question is, did she walk in front of the bus intentionally, or was it an accident? And the reason her family, who should know the answer to that probably, doesn't know, is because they're all kind of estranged after a few events. Now my main problem with this book was that the structure itself is designed to be repetitive. That, I think, is just an issue of the way that Eva decided to set up the book, because I feel like the concept actually could have been really good, but it was just the way it was actually executed I wish had just been different. So just to give you an example, a lot of the chapters are Rosie's consciousness, and they all start the same way. So after a while, you're like, okay, I get it. And then after a while, the jokes that I loved by the author just weren't that funny anymore because you just heard a similar one like 8 pages earlier in the chapter before it. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it was just like a little repetitive. I'm sure that a certain market is not going to mind that about this book, and they're just kind of like enjoy it as like a simple, almost Lifetime movie-esque sort of reading experience, and they'll probably be fine with it. But for me, as a book reviewer and book blogger, the repetitive structure I didn't like. I also was surprised that I didn't like the characters as much or connect to them as much, because in something like Happy, her previous book, you could fall in love with a character in like a paragraph. So I'm not sure what was missing. To me, that's always a mystery. I don't know how authors do that. Another author who does that is Barbara Taylor Bradford, where like it's literally been 2 paragraphs and you will die on a sword for that character because you love them so much. I'm not sure what magic stew makes that happen, but whatever it wasn't in her latest book. So it was okay, but I don't like super recommend it. Next up is a book that I'm gonna have a more detailed video for you on Tuesday. This should be Saturday when this is coming out, so that'll be Tuesday. It's gonna be called Rereading a Book from My Childhood, and it is about, obviously, The Secret Garden. So I basically haven't read this in like 15 years, and then I read it again and decided to review it as an adult. What I decided was that as a kid, I would have given it 5 stars, but as a book blogger, reviewer, person, that I would really give it more like 3.5 stars. I will leave that for that video, and we will jump into the next one, which is The Happiness Advantage by Shawn Achor. Now this is your typical like self-help, positive psychology, try to make yourself happier, how can you manipulate your brain to behave better and make you better and happier and all that jazz. It's a fine book, it's short, it's a nice reminder. My problem with it was twofold. A lot of that stuff that he talks about is just incredibly intuitive. It's stuff you already know. It's stuff you'd see in like buzz articles like, hey, meditate. Hey, you'll be happier if you're surrounded by happier people. You know, it's just stuff that you know. And if you want like a little quick reminder, then it'd be a fine read. But if you're looking for like actual practical tips about how to be happier, then you're probably not gonna find it in there. It's a lot of like positive psychology references to some experiments that have been done and articles that have been published. It's a lot about the author's own experiences with helping people accomplish being happier and more fulfilled and being more productive. It's centered a lot on the business workplace and how having happier employees makes a business more successful. Again, stuff I feel like is just intuitive, at least to me, or to what I assume is most people. It could have been better, could have been more practical, but I did get something out of it, which was the 20-second rule that he briefly talks about, and I did my own little experiment on that, and I did a little video on it. If you're curious about that in particular, you can check that out, but otherwise, the book itself, middle of the road. Wasn't great, wasn't bad. Borrow it if you want. Last up on the middle of the road books is my Louisa May biography that I read. It's literally called Louisa May Alcott, a personal biography. It's by Susan Cheever, the daughter of John Cheever, and I got a heck of a lot of information out of it for my Little Women biography video, but I will say, as the book as a whole, I wish that it had been a little bit more focused on Louisa. It's really a lot of the time about the people surrounding Louisa, and I felt like we didn't get into Louisa until the latter half. While I enjoyed it and it was an easy read, like an easy voice and easy rhythm to get through for a biography, which is saying a lot, to be honest, because, you know, some biographies I feel like are extremely dry. This wasn't like that. But I will say there's a lot of her own feelings about the time thrown in, the author's feelings, and I didn't quite find that accurate. That's something that kind of annoys me in nonfiction. I don't like it when, unless it's an opinion book, when the author goes too far with their own opinions and sort of pushes a modern perspective on an old-timey world, because I don't feel like that's really fair. I don't know, that kind of irked me, but overall it was a fun book to read if you want to like learn about Louisa and really the people around her and her father a little bit. Then it's fun and good to read, but I would just say it's not like a book that I thought was supremely well done or a book that I would highly recommend that you spend money on. I got mine from the library. Go check out your library, it's the bomb. All right, my dear, we've done it. Those are the books that I loved, those 3 books, and then we just did the books that I thought were, you know, okay, but I didn't love them. But now we're gonna get into the complaining. And let me tell you, I am very upset about the 3 books on this list, particularly 2 of them. I was not pleased. I'm trying to decide which one I want to complain about first, and it's very difficult because I'm very cranky about all of them. You know what? Let's do the one that I'm least cranky about first, and then we'll do the most cranky ones because that sounds more fun. All right, so the first one is The Suspect by Fiona Barton. You know that you're not going to like a book when you're on page 120 and you have like 200 some odd pages left and you realize how incredibly much you are dreading the remaining like 280 pages or whatever it was. That is when you know you have a problem. And let me tell you, I hated it. What's kind of annoying to me about books like this, the mystery itself was fine. And you find yourself like 25% invested in the story just because you want to know what happens in the mystery a little bit. But then you can't help but get annoyed at a lot of aspects which you feel like are detracting from the work or the concept as a whole. Such as, this is one of those books that was written with perspective shift, so it's like every chapter is like a different person. Sometimes I absolutely love that, but it's a hard thing to do well. In this case, it was like the perspective shifts were like super jumpy and it was all over the place, and none of the segments had enough time spent on them for you to really get to know the characters or their perspectives, so you didn't feel connected to anybody and you just did not care. The other issue is that it's extremely repetitive, and that drives me nuts, especially, well, like in general, but especially in mysteries, because I feel like I already know and I want to know the next thing. So tell me, gosh dang it. So it's an easy thing to fall into if an author does not have the gift for writing multiple perspectives, because what will happen is that you hear about an event from one character, and then a few chapters later you'll hear about that event again from another character, and then a few pages after that you hear about that event a 3rd time. And at that point, you're like, okay, we know, move on. And it's at that point that I feel like just frustrated and ready for it to be over, which is exactly how I felt. A lot of it felt like unnecessary static, just text for the sake of text. This book I felt like it was like way longer than it needed to be. And on top of all that, it was just thematically weak. The pacing was weak. The characters, I'm gonna say it again, were weak. And lastly, the details of the mystery and of the character psychology and dynamics and all that was not very believable. So for me, just a failure all around. Sorry that I'm not sorry. So I would totally skip The Suspect. And now let's get into the next one. And how I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna do Evermore, which if you saw my first 1-star read of the year video, was not pleased, and I'm not going to repeat myself here. If you're curious about it in particular, then you can go watch that video, but I will just say it was book 2 in a YA series. Book 1 I really loved. Book 2 completely let me down. Everything in it was just a complete disconnect from everything I loved in book 1. It was all over the place. The plot was crazy. I didn't like the characters. On and on it goes. I was extremely cranky about it because I hate going into a book that you think is going to be good because it's part of a series and you already know that you like the story from book 1, right? You already expect something from the author, from her style from book 1, and then in the next book you're just like, what the hell happened, mate? You alright? So I was not pleased. I'm not going to do like a full complaining again in this video, but just don't read Evermore. You know, if you want to read Everlist, which I did like and gave like 4.5 stars, then read it and just pretend there's not a book 2, you know, just ignore it. That's my advice to you. All right, the last one is a book that I complained, my hip really hurts, so I have to move. This is a book that I complained a lot about on Instagram because I posted a picture of it and I read it in like 24 hours or something, thank God, because I didn't want it to go any longer than that. I had like a whole vent session in my stories where I was extremely upset. So let's complain about it, shall we? I think we shall. I'm too old for these videos. I have to move my legs. Okay, I'm fine. I hope you enjoy this complaining session in the way that I do, because sometimes I think complaining is weirdly fun and cathartic and then I feel better after. So I hope that this does that for you. So let's talk about what Hunting Annabelle actually is. Basically, it's a book about a younger guy, like early 20s, who has violent tendencies. all right? And he meets a girl, and then the girl goes missing. So there's a few questions at play here. There's basically two mysteries. A, we want to know about this young man, Sean, and what is his past? What has he done? Because it's alluded to, but you don't really know what his deal is. There's talk of like a psychiatric institution, and you just kind of wonder, what the hell happened to you, mate? And it's one of those characters that you kind of feel connected to, even though you know he's not the best guy. In the beginning, you sort of feel like you're rooting for him. The second mystery is, okay, what happened to this girl he met? Annabelle, hence the title, Hunting Annabelle. Where did she go? Who kidnapped her? What happened to her? You know? So in theory, that was a great start, and for the first 100 pages, I was like 100% rooting for this book. I was 100% enjoying it, loving the hell out of it, reading it fast, raring to go. And I had frankly heard in some of my other reviewers' posts that it took a deep dive after the halfway point, but I like to make my own opinions, and so I was kind of ignoring that and just going about my own business, reading my own experience with it, and they were completely right. After the halfway point, it's absolutely trash. That's a harsh word, but I truly mean it. This book took a huge deep dive into awfulness. It was like the fastest devolution of a book, of a story that I may have seen maybe ever. Just to like give you an example of how far it fell, when I started reading it, I thought for sure it's gonna be like a 4-star book, maybe more. And after the midway point, and then by the end, I was like, no, absolutely not. 1 star, 0 if I could. Hated it. I can't forgive a good beginning if the ending is that terrible. I can't, I refuse. So that's just me personally, but I'm not gonna give it credit for being decent in the beginning because it makes me so mad and upset and annoyed by the end. And the last thing I want as a reviewer is for me to recommend you a book and for you to feel like that. So that's why I don't hold back any punches, is because like people buy books based on our reviews, so I feel like reviews have to be super honest, and I just don't want you to get this book thinking that I recommended it and then be like super cranky as hell by the end. If I recommend you a book, then I want you to know that I loved it so much, and if you didn't like it, then that's just a difference of taste. But sometimes books are terrible, and this, I truly believe, is one of them. Just to note, this book is set in the 80s, and that was another thing I liked in the beginning because I thought this is done really well, and I loved the just like subtle references that weren't like shoved in your face, but if you were paying attention, they were there, like New Coke and Cool Ranch Doritos, and the music references, they were like Walkman and stuff like that. So I thought all those details were really, really well done, and I just liked where I thought it was going. But here's the biggest realization I had while reading this. So, you know when books that are super successful come out, books like Gone Girl or You by Carolyn Kepnes, I can never say her last name, for the love of God, someone tell me how to say it. But books that are just highly successful, people love them, they become seminal works that totally like shift a perspective or give you a new idea on things. It seems that after those books are released and do well, the publishing industry spends a couple of years scraping everything they can from those works, and they try to insert them into a lot of other books, and frankly it almost never works. I feel like I phrased it best in my extremely cranky Goodreads review, so if you don't mind, I don't want to like stumble across myself too much here, so I'm just gonna read you this line. I basically said what I just said now, and then I wrote, you get a lot of copycats, a lot of imitations, and that is exactly what you have in Hunting Annabelle. This book has tried to take what it can from some truly great books and made only a cheap attempt at an imprint of someone else's genius. So that's basically my thoughts in a nutshell. I'm really mean sometimes, but this book made me mad. I was upset by the end. After that halfway point, all the negatives that I had been like trying to ignore to enjoy the storyline, it just came to the forefront and like smacked me in the face. I swear, it was like the book reached up and just punched me, and it was rude. Suddenly, it's like a lot of necessary detail is missing, the plot is senseless, it is just a mess. And what most annoyed me is that if you were going to write a book about serial killing or a violent individual, and this is not a spoiler, okay, it's on the front flap. If you're going to write a book about killing, about violent personalities, then I expect you to have at least a base psychiatric understanding of how killers' minds work, or at least the theory behind it. It really peeves me when authors seem to just like write based on like weird assumptions that frankly don't make any sense once you get even a few pages into a book on the psychology of serial killers. So that kind of just annoyed me. The characters' choices felt cheap, they felt contrived, it felt like just a bad imitation. She also threw in popular psychiatric diagnoses that are kind of like interesting right now and that people are like fascinated by them, like synesthesia, which The Color of Bill Arkham's Murder was a fantastic and perfectly researched book with a murder at the center about a boy with that condition, and that I feel was fantastic. And this is another example of, I feel like she just took someone else's genius, someone else's ideas, and tried to like insert them in her own story, and I just was very annoyed and upset by that because it's just completely unrelated, and I just hated that she threw that in there as a bit of like, oh, this is popular right now, let me check that off my task list. That's how it felt to me. And then lastly, because I know I am supremely complaining about this book, but honestly it really aggravated me, like to an extent that most books don't. The last thing that annoyed me about it was that she used sex in a gory, grisly way as just a way to try to add some sort of cheap, false glamour to the story, and I just felt like it was ridiculous and frankly lame. Now that I've gotten extremely cranky, I would say do not read The Suspect, don't read Evermore, and definitely do not bother reading Hunting Annabelle. Yep. Alright, I need to like cleanse my aura because that last book, I'm still mad. I'm still mad about it, you know? Alright, so that is the wrap up for January. The books that I would highly recommend you check out are definitely Louis L'Amour's No Traveler Returns, The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker, and The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris. Loved them. I hope you read one of them, and I hope you find them on a shelf someday soon because girl, you deserve a good read. If you liked this video, do me a favor, give it a big thumbs up, drop me a comment below, tell me what book you read lately that you loved or you hated, depending on which one you've been lucky with lately. And if you're new here and you haven't subscribed, go ahead and press that follow button, because if you like books, if you like bookish things, if you like TBRs, reviews, unhauls, hauls, all the good bookish stuff, then I'm your girl. So go ahead and press that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye guys.